Greetings viewers, Eric the Car Guy, also known as ETCG1 on this channel. Today I'd like to talk a little bit about should I rebuild my engine. The topic often comes up, where there's a situation where you have an engine that you know is damaged and something needs to be done about it. So you're wanting to keep the vehicle, whatever it is, car, truck, but you've suffered some kind of catastrophic engine failure. And now you're faced with a decision of either replacing the engine or rebuilding the engine. I have a lot of people on the forum that are of the camp that they want to rebuild. And I kind of am making this video in a way to sort of steer you away from that action. Behind me I have a 2001 Sonoma that some of you may know that I'll be putting an engine in the not too distant future. And this is kind of what sparked this conversation that I'd like to have with you now. And there are a lot of different ways to go with this, and mainly it's the choice between replacement of the engine or rebuilding the engine. And as far as replacement is concerned, you have a couple of options there also. You can either replace it with a salvage yard unit, or you can replace it with a remanufactured unit. And then even when you go to the remanufactured stuff, there's a short block, there's a long block. The difference between a short block and a long block is a short block is basically just the engine block, the pistons, and the bottom end assembly that's all ready to go. No cylinder heads, intake manifold, none of that stuff is included in a short block. A long block means it's got cylinder heads on it. In fact, this engine here is a long block assembly, and even though it doesn't have a valve cover or timing cover or some of the other hard parts that you'd find, those parts can easily be swapped over from the old engine to the new assembly. So that's the difference between a short block and a long block, if you ever hear those terms. But the main thing that I'd like to discuss here is I'm of the camp that replacement is going to be more cost effective than rebuilding. The only time I think that rebuilding is really going to be cost effective is when you're talking about something older that you might not be able to find parts for, or it's going to be prohibitively expensive to find a replacement for a particular engine. And this does happen from time to time. But the reason why I'm in the camp of replacement over rebuilding is because many of you out there in the DIY world don't necessarily possess all of the tools, and I'm talking about measuring tools. Sure, you can use Plastigauge to measure bearing clearances and things like that. And Plastigauge, maybe I can find a picture for you here. Plastigauge is it's kind of like a little piece of wax, plastic actually, that you place in between the bearing and say a crank journal or a connecting rod journal or something like that. You place that piece of plastic in there, you torque everything to spec, you take it all back apart, and you basically measure the thickness of the wax or plastic, the deformation that it had when it was all torqued together, and that gives you a rough idea of what the clearances are. Now, I've talked before in other videos on Eric the Car Guy about the importance of those clearances and how it relates to oil pressure. And the reason why there is a loss of oil pressure most times is because those clearances of like the main bearings and connecting rod bearings get wide enough, those gaps get wide enough to where the oil pressure just sort of runs out, or the oil just sort of runs out there, and as a result you have a loss of pressure. So when you go to rebuild an engine, it's extremely critical that you have those clearances correct and within specification, because if not, then you could have a loss of oil pressure, and the loss of oil pressure puts you right back in that same place that you were when you had that catastrophic failure. So with the thousands of things that need to be assembled and assembled correctly, also torquing things. You don't often see me use a torque wrench on many of the repairs that I do, but if I'm doing engine work, yes, I am absolutely using a torque wrench to make sure that everything is torqued to spec when I'm in there. So your torque specs are extremely important when you do a rebuild. Many of the parts that you use, also piston ring clearance, those things are extremely important. The finish of the cylinder walls, that's something that's often overlooked. Oh, I'm just going to throw a set of rings in it and that'll be that. Well, what happens over time is that cylinder will wear out the bore that it lives in the same way that the piston skirt and other parts of the piston also get worn out. So the hole that the piston's in and the piston both get worn out. You go in there, you just throw a set of rings in, you're really not completely addressing the problem. Sure, if you've got oil control rings that have gotten all gummed up over time and aren't allowing the oil to pass back through the piston and back down into the crankcase, it can cause an oil consumption issue. And many times you can go in and clean that stuff up and you'll probably be okay. But I'm going to argue that if you have an engine that is to that point where it's got those kind of deposits and that buildup on those oil control rings, that most likely that buildup is elsewhere within the engine, and just slapping a set of rings on it is not fully addressing the problem. So this is what I'm getting to. A lot of you seem to be under the impression that I'll just throw a set of piston rings or a new set of bearings in, and that'll be that, without any thought of those measurements or anything that go along with that. Getting back to the part about the cylinder and the bore, the way you address that is you have a machine shop, most likely. Yeah, you have a machine shop go in, and you either bore those cylinders out so that they're true and purchase larger pistons to go in place of that, or you may have to re-sleeve the block depending upon if there's enough there to be machined. Once again, we keep getting deeper and deeper down this rabbit hole of what a proper rebuild of an engine would be. Not to mention when you buy all those parts individually. I'm sure there are engine rebuild kits that come with everything you need, but once again, if you neglect the machining, if you neglect the measuring, if you neglect the torques, the torque specs and all those kinds of things, not to mention just removing an engine from an engine compartment, especially on some vehicles, is quite an undertaking. And there's a lot of things that need to be connected and disconnected when you do that replacement. So there's a thousand different places for something to go wrong in that process. And if something does go wrong, basically you're back to square one, where you still have a broken engine inside a vehicle and the vehicle's not going to be going anywhere. In a way, this discussion kind of crosses over to transmissions as well, depending upon your skill level and tools. I mean, automatic transmissions, let's face it, you're going to need a lot of special tools to get in there and get things apart and service those things properly so that they work when you put them back in. Because one of the worst things that can possibly happen in a situation where you go to rebuild one of those complex components, like say an engine or a transmission, is that you go through all that trouble and then you put it back in the vehicle and you find out just because of one little spring or one little fastener or something wasn't placed correctly is the cause of a failure that winds you right back in the same place that you were to begin with. Now, in the case of this truck behind me, I had presented it two ways to the owners of the vehicle. I said, okay, I was able to find a used engine for you for, I can't remember the exact cost, but it was like, I don't know, $1,800 or something like that, or $1,500, somewhere in that neighborhood. And the rebuilds that were out there were only about $300 more. So for $1,800, you could get a completely reconditioned engine, which is what I showed you earlier, and replace it that way. This way, the onus is on somebody else. It comes with a 3-year warranty. So it's not on you to make sure that you get absolutely everything correct, because people that build engines are doing it all day long. I mean, they're familiar with the product, they're familiar with the different pitfalls, or perhaps there's certain flaws in the engine design that they're aware of, and they're able to update either by replacing parts or possibly maybe even a little bit of light machining or something like that. But these are people that are experts at what they do. So all day long they're rebuilding engines or they're rebuilding transmissions. You, or even me, am not really in a position to do that. So I don't have that working knowledge. I don't have that special equipment or that special tool that's going to make that job, make that work, make it ensure for a lasting repair. So I just put it on somebody else to give me a 3-year warranty to say, okay, within that 3 years' time, if there's a failure of anything that we, the rebuilders, are responsible for, you just call us up and we'll send you another engine, and we'll take it from there. Sometimes labor's included, but good luck with that sometimes. But aside from all that, I'm posing the question to you, and I'm going to also put my opinions out here, because this will save me some typing later. Because as far as my opinion on whether or not you should rebuild or not, I would be advocating that you replace rather than rebuild. And my list of reasons I've just given. So why don't you tell me what your experiences are? Maybe you've gone through the process of, I had that Dodge engine a couple of years ago that I replaced and got all in the vehicle, and found out that the engine itself was bad, and I had to take it all back out and put it in again a second time. So even in the used part market, there's potential for issues. So the lesson learned from that was make sure that you check it out and make sure that the crankshaft can rotate before you can put it in the vehicle. Aside from all that, you're talking about a major surgery either way, and you want to ensure a lasting repair. So I'm of the opinion that if you're in that situation, the best thing to do is replacement over rebuilding. So I'm going to put the question to you now. What are your experiences, and how do you feel about replacement over rebuilding? Are you an engine builder? Do you have experience with that? Have you seen people in the DIY market and the kinds of things that have happened when they attempt an engine rebuild? It's easy to say. It really is easy to say that I'm going to rebuild my engine, and you think to yourself, I'm just going to go in there and replace a bunch of parts and everything will be better. Now, once again, there's a little bit more involved than that. A little bit of measuring helps, and just things to ensure, once again, a lasting repair. So what are your experiences? What are your thoughts on rebuilding versus replacing engines, transmissions, large, complicated, hard parts in your vehicle? I look forward to your comments below, but also I'm going to post a link in the description to a discussion over at my forum at ericthecarguy.com about this particular video, where you can also share your thoughts, and basically that's where I go to respond for the most part. But also, if you have automotive questions, I would ask that you head over to ericthecarguy.com and type in a couple of keywords into the search function there, and most likely, well, I'm hoping that you come up with an answer to your query. If you do not, feel free to sign up for our forum. It's absolutely free. All you need is an email address. Post your question to the service and repair section, and we will, including myself, will make an effort to try to answer that question for you. And if you just want to connect with Eric the Car Guy, you can find me at Google+, Facebook, and Twitter. And I will close with, be safe, have fun, and stay dirty. I look forward to your comments. See you later.